I want to start today's video with a few facts, and then I want to talk about why these facts matter to us. This week, the U.S. Consumer Confidence Index, it fell from 105.6 in August down to 98.7. And that is a big miss. The expectations were that that number would come in at 104. This is the biggest one-day drop now since August of 2021. And for perspective, before the pandemic, the index was at 132.6 before the pandemic. So we can see how much confidence has been eroded over the last few years. The biggest drops came from those aged 35 to 54 and people earning less than $50,000 a year. Now, Dana Peterson, she's the chief economist at the Conference Board, the people who come up with this number, and she says consumers' assessments of current business conditions turned negative while views of the current labor market situation softened further. She went on to say, consumers were also more pessimistic about future labor market conditions and less positive about future business conditions and future income. She also noted that consumers have become more pessimistic about future job opportunities, income, and overall business conditions. Now, in addition to this main index decline, the present situation index, this reflects how consumers feel about current economic conditions. That dropped by 10.3 points down to the current level of 124.3. So the expectations index, this measures consumers' outlook for the next 6 months. That fell to 81.7. Like so many of the other indicators that we're seeing these days, a score below 80 on this measure is often seen as a sign of a potential recession. Job availability continued to weaken. There's fewer consumers saying that jobs are plentiful. That number came in at 30.9%. And more people are saying that it's harder to find jobs. On top of this, concerns about inflation were also climbing. The 12-month inflation outlook has risen to 5.2%. Reality is that, for the most part, these recession fears are still relatively low, but the percentage of consumers who think the economy is already in a recession is on the rise. Now, on that note, if you're not subscribed, you can go ahead and do that now. Next week, I'm going to be posting a full video on recessions. It's one that you're not going to want to miss. So why am I taking the time to talk so much about this consumer confidence information? Why does it matter so much? Well, when consumer confidence falls, it typically signals declining optimism about the economy in general. That can lead to a bunch of different economic and financial consequences. In the video now, I want to talk about the four most common outcomes that are historically associated with declining consumer confidence. I want to start with reduced consumer spending. So, lower consumer confidence, that often, usually, will lead to people spending less, and this can significantly slow down economic growth. Obviously, when people are feeling uncertain about their own financial futures, they're less likely to make big purchases. We're talking about homes, cars, appliances, big ticket items like that, or even spend on discretionary items. In this case, we're talking about dining out, restaurants, we're talking about travel. When you see this reduction in demand, obviously that can have a negative effect on a bunch of different industries that are reliant on consumer spending. Think retail, think travel, think entertainment. That is a clear signal that we don't want to go down that road if we can possibly avoid it. Now, also, falling consumer confidence is often a precursor to broader economic slowdowns. And yes, I'm going to say the R word, even recessions. When you think about the fact that consumer spending makes up a big part of GDP in a lot of economies, particularly in the US, declining confidence, that can trigger a pretty vicious cycle of lower spending, reduced business revenues, layoffs, and then further decreases in spending. That's not good. The third point here is that we're seeing a strong weakening in the labor market. I guess that's not a good set of terms. We're not seeing a strong labor market. We're seeing a big weakening in labor markets in general. Businesses, when they experience this lower demand due to this reduced consumer spending, all tied into the confidence, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to respond by cutting costs. What happens then? Well, usually this is we go through this phase now where we see hiring freezes, we see layoffs, we see at a minimum reduced hours for workers, and this is now a further hit to this already weakening labor market. Lower unemployment, wage growth, that can further cut into consumer confidence, and that just perpetuates the economic downturn, kind of like a downward spiral. And lastly, on this topic today, a decline in stock markets. Let's talk about that. Falling consumer confidence can have a real impact, a negative impact on financial markets. When investors see this declining confidence as a signal that then they say the economy may be weakening. That can then lead to a sell-off in the stocks, and particularly, as I mentioned earlier, sort of in these sectors that are heavily reliant on consumer spending. If this happens, what do we see? Well, we see the decline in stock prices that can further hurt consumer wealth. It just sort of reinforces the pessimism that we could see in conditions like this. These four outcomes, they're all interconnected. They all are tied to consumer confidence, and it can set off that chain reaction, which leads to broader economic difficulties. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying there will be a recession anytime soon. We know recessions are yet to come, but I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime soon. But I say, as a prudent investor, you just can't simply ignore these signs. You need to adjust your portfolios accordingly to make sure that they're going to meet your needs for when we do hit those more difficult times. More Canadians than ever are older, and older Canadians are living longer. So because of this, Canadians need to find a way to stretch their savings into retirement income for longer lives. When you are retired, you want solid, consistent income that works no matter what economic environment you are in, and that is why diversification is so important. I want to bring your attention to the Harvest Diversified Monthly Income ETF. This is a fund that offers access to a diversified multi-sector portfolio overlaid with an active covered call strategy for attractive monthly cash flow. Moreover, HDIF, it employs modest leverage at 25% for even higher income and growth potential. A few more key facts about this fund. First off, it is one-stop diversified core monthly income solution. That's always convenient. You get access to the leading large cap companies that are diversified across sectors and geographies. You have access to powerful long-term trends, high income every month, modest leverage at approximately 1.25 times to enhance income, zero management fees. The fund is subject to the fees of the underlying ETFs that are held in the HDIF portfolio. You can learn more at Harvest ETFs. I will put a link in the description of this video. The U.S. Justice Department, they filed a lawsuit against Visa, and they're accusing the company of illegally monopolizing the debit card market. The lawsuit itself, it claims that Visa has used the dominant position that it has for over a decade now to force businesses essentially to rely on its network, and they've been limiting competition and stifling new market entrants. Here's what Attorney General Merrick Garland said.
We allege that to maintain this monopoly power, Visa deploys a web of unlawful anti-competitive agreements to penalize merchants and banks for using competing payment networks. At the same time, it coerces would-be market entrants into unlawful agreements not to compete by threatening high fees if they do not cooperate and promising big payoffs if they do. The result is a debit market where Visa has unlawfully amassed the power to extract fees that far exceed what it could charge in a competitive market.
Visa is strongly denying the allegations. They're calling the lawsuit meritless, and they're saying that it will defend itself in court. Now, Julie Rottenberg, this is Visa's general counsel, she said that the suit ignores the growing number of competitors, especially in online payments. And she says today's lawsuit ignores the reality that Visa is just one of the many competitors in a debit space that is growing. And that certainly is true. Anyone who has bought anything online or checked out at a store, you know that there are a whole slew of companies out there today that are offering for new ways to pay for goods and services. The Justice Department, though, they allege that Visa controls over 60% now of debit card transactions in the U.S., earns over $7 billion in processing fees from these transactions. It then goes further. It accuses Visa of imposing exclusive agreements with merchants and banks and penalizing those who consider using alternative payment systems. Now, here is the meat of the complaint as far as I can tell. According to the complaint, Visa also induces would-be competitors to become partners instead of entering the market as competitors by offering generous monetary incentives and threatening punitive additional fees. As the complaint alleges, Visa co-opted the competition because it feared losing share, revenues, or being displaced by another debit network altogether. Visa is also facing backlash from a bunch of merchants who are accusing credit card companies in general of charging excessive fees. Some merchants, they did reach a $30 billion settlement with Visa and MasterCard, but others are arguing that it's not enough compensation to cover the costs that they have incurred. Interesting story out of Vancouver. In its efforts to tackle Vancouver's housing crisis, the BC government says it will be partnering with 3 First Nations to develop 2,600 new housing units. And these homes will be sold at 60% of market value, with the province providing financing for 40% of the purchase. Buyers will have to cover the remaining 60%. Now, the housing units, they're located in the Heatherlands. They will be available under 99-year leaseholds from the First Nations. Now, Premier David Eby, he noted that in this initiative, it is designed to help middle-income buyers who are currently priced out of Vancouver's market. He said, "For too long, the idea of home ownership has been out of reach for way too many people who earn a decent income, who are priced out of the market and do not see any path to home ownership." In the program, the province is contributing $670 million in financing. But important here, it isn't a grant. It has to be repaid within 25 years or when the home is sold. Now, here's how this is going to work overall. The Heatherlands project, it will prioritize first-time home buyers who meet specific criteria. The buyers must be Canadian citizens or permanent residents. They must have lived in British Columbia for the past 2 years, and they must have no ownership in other properties at the time of the purchase. There will be a requirement for a 5% deposit on the 60% purchase price. That's necessary. And buyers must use the home as their principal residence. Eby says that the government has also set up strict rules to prevent the anticipated speculation and property flipping. He says, anyone who thinks they can game the system, there will be serious consequences. If you are not subscribed to our Pulse newsletter, which comes out every weekend, I will put a link here so you can join the community there. As always, I will thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you next time.